my name is Billy Derrick, and welcome into the 2016 college football season preview show. My name is Billy Derrick, not alongside Charlie Sheridan. He is not able to make it today, but today I'm going to be discussing all the Power 5 conferences, running through their conferences, discussing the top players, top coaches, top teams, and discussing the winners of each division, and eventually a champion for every single Power 5 conference. And we're going to start by previewing the SEC. We're going to really dive into the SEC today and really talk about the talented players. In my opinion, the SEC is absolutely loaded this year with all kinds of talent. And I'm going to pick the player of the year in each conference in this season preview video. So hope you guys will enjoy it. We're going to go ahead and get going. Leonard Fournette, the running back at LSU, is my prediction for the SEC Player of the Year this year. He's just so talented. I mean, last year, if you watch any of the LSU games, he was the player to watch. Not only, I mean, in every single game, everyone was talking about, I can't wait to see Leonard Fournette, and that's truly how talented he actually is. So, and as I said, so much talent this year in the SEC, not necessarily in terms of quarterbacks and maybe skill position players, but when you look at the defenses in this year's SEC, you look at Texas A&M with Myles Garrett, Alabama obviously loaded with another great defense. LSU has one of the top secondaries in the country. So really, when you look at the SEC this year, they are absolutely loaded on the defensive side. Quarterbacks, they're a little bit down this year. Ole Miss's Chad Kelly was projected as the SEC media starting quarterback on the first team. So, you know, you have Chad Kelly, you lose Dak Prescott from last year from Mississippi State. You have a lot of young quarterbacks coming in. At Vanderbilt, you have Kyle Shermer. But another proven quarterback, in my opinion, is Joshua Dobbs out of the University of Tennessee. Dobbs this year is going to lead that Tennessee offense, and it's all going to lean on Josh Dobbs' shoulders this year for the Tennessee Vols. What can Josh Dobbs do for the Vols this year? I mean, last year, he had to play behind a struggling offensive line, so you know there were a few questions last year, not as many questions this year for Josh Dobbs and the Tennessee Vols. So it's going to be exciting to be watching Tennessee certainly this year. So starting off in the East Division, my projections are Tennessee finishing number 1, Florida at 2, and Georgia at 3. In my opinion, Tennessee is the overall 1, and then you have 2A and 2B in Florida and Georgia. Florida and Georgia are not going to be very far behind at all, behind Tennessee this year. And honestly, I think Tennessee is going to beat Florida and Georgia this year, but they're going to be great close games. And if Tennessee loses to one of those teams, I think their chances of winning the East are certainly in jeopardy. So you have Tennessee winning the East, as I said, Florida and Georgia at 2 and 3. I think Vanderbilt finishes 4th in the East this year. Now moving on to the West, I have Alabama winning the West. LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Auburn will all compete in the SEC West this year. I think there are a lot of underrated teams this year in the SEC West with Auburn and Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is a big team to watch this year in the SEC West. I mean, the SEC West is easily the most talented division every year in college football, without a doubt. But in my opinion, Texas A&M can shock some people this year. Obviously, you have Alabama and LSU at the top, always. I'm not going to say always competing, but most of the seasons you have Alabama and LSU competing at the top of the West Division every single year, battling it out. And then you have to have those three teams in that second tier. And in my opinion, that second tier is Ole Miss, A&M, and Auburn. I think Auburn, with John Franklin III at quarterback, can be almost not unbeatable, but I think they can show some signs of what Cam Newton did at Auburn and maybe what Nick Marshall was able to do at Auburn. So I think you definitely need to watch out for a couple of sneaky teams in the SEC West in Auburn and Texas A&M. And eventually in Atlanta at the SEC Championship, my prediction is Alabama over Tennessee. I have Alabama beating Tennessee in the SEC Championship in Atlanta. So that is the SEC preview. Once again, so much talent this year in the SEC. It's going to be extremely fun to watch. So many great games. Obviously, Alabama, LSU every year. Auburn, Alabama every single year. Ole Miss, Mississippi State every single weekend. It's a dogfight in the SEC. Now we're moving on to the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference. Deshaun Watson of the Clemson Tigers. He leads my projections as the ACC Player of the Year. Last year he was in the Heisman contention. This year I think it's going to be between him and Christian McCaffrey at Stanford to win it all and to win the Heisman this year. In the Atlantic Division, as I've been talking about, the Clemson Tigers, I think Clemson and Florida State in the Atlantic Division, in the ACC, that they're just going to duke it out. That Clemson-Florida State game is going to be absolutely tremendous. Whoever wins that one, in my opinion, will go on to win the Atlantic Division. And most of the years, most of the seasons, that is what's happened, or what has happened. So, like I said, Florida State, it's really a toss-up here. I'm mainly picking Clemson because of who I just mentioned, Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, I mean, they have Deshaun Watson at quarterback, Wayne Gallman at running back, Artavis Scott, and another talented wide receiver at Clemson. So they have a great wide receiving core. One of the more explosive offenses in the entire country is the Clemson Tigers. Their defense is returning a lot of veteran leaders as well from last year. So I just have to give Clemson the edge with a proven quarterback. Florida State not necessarily having a proven quarterback currently right now. So I'm going to go with Clemson winning the Atlantic Division in the ACC. Moving on to the Coastal Division, many people saying that this is the weaker division in the ACC. I tend to disagree, mainly because of the fact that all the success North Carolina had last year. Speaking of the UNC Tar Heels, I have UNC winning the ACC Coastal Division this year, with Miami and Virginia Tech not far behind. I think Miami and Virginia Tech will certainly compete with UNC to win that Coastal Division. Obviously, there are two teams with new head coaches, with Mark Richt and Fuente coming over from Memphis. So I think they'll both do well. I think they'll both have great, solid seasons. I think North Carolina is going to have an even better season than they did last year. I think they have the capability of finishing 10-2 this year. Miami and Virginia Tech, obviously, Virginia Tech plays Tennessee week 2 at the Battle of Bristol. So, in my opinion, you have Clemson in the Atlantic playing UNC in the Coastal Division, and then I have Clemson over UNC in the ACC championship game this year. Clemson, they just have a great group of wide receivers, as I said, a great quarterback, great running back behind Wayne Gallman, great coach in Dabo Swinney. So I really like Clemson this year to win it all in the ACC. Moving on to the Big Ten, J.T. Barrett at Ohio State is my projected Big Ten Player of the Year. Last year, J.T. Barrett was injured, was not able to get a whole lot of playing time, and Ohio State, they had to roll with. They had 3 quarterbacks last year that they could roll in and out. This year, they're gonna have to stick with J.T. Barrett, and that's gonna be a great decision. It's gonna prove to be a great decision. On the side of Urban Meyer, head coach of the Buckeyes. So, speaking of Ohio State, I have them winning the East Division, as I do almost every single year. But I think I was very tempted to pick Michigan to win the East Division this year. Also, you have Michigan State and Penn State. So that East Division, I think, can compete with the SEC West this year in terms of talented divisions in college football, because you have Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State. You're loaded. You're loaded in that East Division in the Big Ten, and I think they can compete with anyone around college football. When Ohio State has to play Michigan and Michigan State, that's going to be the landmark of their season this year. That's going to really determine what kind of season Ohio State has this year. And then moving on to the West Division, the weaker division in the Big Ten, obviously, I'm going to pick Iowa to win that division, along with Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Northwestern competing to win that division. Obviously, Nebraska a couple years ago firing Bo Pelini, their new coach. Obviously, I give credit to Nebraska's Riley, Riley, their new head coach. So I really like Nebraska this year, but I don't think they have quite enough to overrule a strong Iowa team. So Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Northwestern are going to be competing for that division. I think Iowa's going to be too much for them. And then eventually in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, I have Ohio State beating Iowa. So I don't think as much of a talented overall conference the Big Ten is this year. I think they're just loaded in that East Division, and it's certainly going to be a fun division to watch. Keep your eye on that division around college football. Now moving on to the Big 12 Conference. Obviously all the talk about the proposed expansion of the Big 12, and it's going to be certainly interesting to watch here in the next couple years who they eventually bring in to join the Big 12. And Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma is my projected winner of the Big 12 Player of the Year. He last year he had more of a gunslinger mentality. He really showed a lot of signs that he can be a great quarterback. I mean, one game in particular last season from Baker Mayfield was the Tennessee game, where they were down 17-3 in the fourth quarter, and Baker Mayfield leads Oklahoma to a comeback victory, all because of his arms and his legs. I mean, Baker Mayfield, I think he'll be in contention to win the Heisman this year. I really love Mayfield at Oklahoma. Obviously, they have Samaje Perine coming back at running back, Joe Mixon at wide receiver. So Oklahoma, one of the more talented teams in the country, led by Bob Stoops this year. I have them winning it all this year in the Big 12. But I also have TCU, Texas, and Texas Tech not far behind at all. I love those three teams. I think they're very even in terms of talent-wise. All three of those teams have explosive offenses. I really like Texas Tech this year. I think Cliff Kingsbury can surprise some folks. Obviously, they finished 7-5 last year, played LSU in the Texas Bowl, but I mean, when you really look at it, I think Texas Tech has enough talent on offense with a great quarterback, Mahomes coming back, a great group of wide receivers, and then same for Texas and TCU. So those three Texas teams, I think they can certainly compete with Oklahoma to win the Big 12 this year. The Big 12, they obviously need a conference championship to be able to play in. That would obviously not only help their conference, but it would help the rest of college football to, just to improve the landscape of college football. I mean, they're the only conference without a conference championship game. They just have an outright proven winner every single year with those 10 teams. And with expansion looming, that could happen in the future with the Big 12. So keep an eye on that. In the Big 12 with the expansion. Now moving on to the Pac-12 conference. Obviously a lot of talent this year in the Pac-12. Speaking of talent, very talented running back at Stanford is Christian McCaffrey. He has all the talent in the world. Last year he was one of the members of the Heisman Trophy finalists, was not able to win it. He gave it up to Derrick Henry from Alabama, but he gave up a great fight. And Christian McCaffrey, from the way he was able to run the ball, not only on offense, but on kickoffs and special teams, punt returns, everything he did for Stanford, he's going to do even more this year. He had a great offseason to improve. I don't know why you wouldn't pick Christian McCaffrey to win the Heisman this year. He is my pick to win the Heisman this year. You have to stay up late to watch Mr. McCaffrey at Stanford. I'm telling you that right now. In the North Division in the Pac-12, speaking of the Stanford Cardinal, I have the Cardinal winning that division. But not far behind is Washington and Oregon. I think Oregon can certainly compete with Stanford to win it all. Oregon has been declining a little bit over the past few years, but I think Stanford's starting to rise behind David Shaw. Obviously, they lose Kevin Hogan, their 5-year starting quarterback last year, so that'll be interesting to watch this year in the Pac-12. And then in the South Division, I have UCLA winning it, but if they lose to USC, vice versa, I have USC winning that division. So, and also Utah in the South Division in the Pac-12, they will also be coming in hot. I really like USC this year. I know I picked UCLA to play Stanford in the Pac-12 championship game, but I love USC this year mainly because of the talent that they have coming back on offense. I know they lose Cody Kessler, but they have to play Alabama that first week, and I think they can compete with Alabama. So if they give Alabama a great game, that's sort of a measuring stick this year for USC. And eventually, in the Pac-12 championship game, I have Stanford beating UCLA. In the Pac-12 championship game this year, it will be in San Francisco, home of the 49ers. Moving on to our last conference to preview, it is the American Athletic Conference. The most talented player, in my opinion, in this conference is Greg Ward Jr., the quarterback at Houston. He had a great season last year, rushed for almost 20 touchdowns in one season as a quarterback. He set the single-season record for a quarterback, rushing touchdowns for a quarterback, so he is certainly going to be a fun player to watch this year for Houston. Moving on to the West Division in the AAC, I have Houston winning that division behind Greg Ward, but I think Memphis can certainly compete behind Houston, and, like I said, Memphis, they're looking to maybe move on over to that Big 12, but I don't think so. I think they're here to stay in the AAC. And Memphis, if they can hold off that Houston-Memphis game in Memphis, is going to be that could be the measuring stick this year in the AAC. Moving on to the East Division in the American Athletic Conference, you have the Cincinnati Bearcats. Cincinnati Bearcats, obviously, they are in the weaker division in the American Athletic Conference, along with Temple. Temple not going to be as good as they were last year, but Temple will still be a competitor. And so in the American Athletic Conference, I have Houston and Cincinnati winning it. I have Houston beating Cincinnati in that American Athletic Conference. So that just about does it here for the Power 5 Conference preview. But right now I'm going to discuss my Heisman watch. As I said earlier, I really love Christian McCaffrey, Deshaun Watson at Clemson, and Leonard Fournette at LSU. Those are my three Heisman candidates to watch this year. And my pick eventually is going to be Christian McCaffrey to win the Heisman this year. So it's going to be a great season of college football. Obviously, that first weekend is one of the better weekends that we have ever seen, not only in college football history, but sports history. You are loaded with games. You're going to have 4 or 5 TVs to watch all of those games. That opening Thursday night, don't forget, come over to West End to watch Vanderbilt take on South Carolina, 7 o'clock on ESPN. And then also that same night, you have Tennessee playing Appalachian State over in Neyland Stadium over in Knoxville. And then moving on, rolling through the weekend, you have Notre Dame playing on Sunday at Texas in Austin, Texas. So it's going to be an interesting matchup there for the Irish. Obviously, a lot of questions, not a lot of questions, but a few big questions surrounding the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Who exactly will start at quarterback for the Irish? That will certainly be interesting to watch. But coming up on our College Football Kickoff Show here on Saturday, we're going to be joined by J.J. Stankovitz. He covers Notre Dame for CSN Chicago. We're going to ask him what is Brian Kelly going to do at that quarterback position with Deshaun Kaiser and Malik Zaire. So it's all going to be certainly interesting to watch here in the upcoming college football season. So that just about wraps it up. Thank you for watching our college football 2016 College Football Power 5 Conference season preview. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned this Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. It's the College Football Kickoff Show alongside Charlie Sheridan. We have a great group of guests lined up for you, so stay tuned for Saturday morning. Thanks for joining, everybody.